Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to open my Bible and read a passage of Scripture. We'll be turning into Matthew chapter 5. We'll read verses 13 to verse 16. It's a passage that many of you already know, but I think it's very appropriate as we're going to be tackling a subject that is, I believe, new to most of you, not all. There's a few here who've heard this presentation, but I know that the vast majority in this room, this will be new information. Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 to 16. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. I bring up this passage because this presentation does not have a lot of scripture. In fact, all it does is have some recommendations at the end for you to consider. This is an informational talk, but this information talk requires that you think about what it means to be salt and light to the culture that I'll be presenting to you this morning. I wish this room was full of young people. I'm glad that we have some here. But this is a message that I believe as we go through, you're going to recognize the importance of it for the millennial generation. In February, I gave this presentation to the Truth Exchange Conference in Southern California, which was geared to try to reach out to the millennial generation and to understand what is the dominant worldview that is focused on that generation, on the 20s and the 30s. And even there, when I gave this presentation, there was a lot of people who didn't know much about what we were talking about. And so today, this information is going to be, I think for some of you, a bit of a mind-blowing experience. So, in the brochure, it says that this is about evolutionary culture, celebrating transformation. Most of you probably were thinking, is this about evolution, biological evolution, because of the word evolutionary culture? No, it's not about biological evolution. This is about a social, spiritual evolution, a revolution, a change in spiritual, religious, and social coming together, culture. And so you see some pictures here. We're going to have a lot of imagery all the way through. I can pretty well guarantee that you're not going to grasp this until we get to the video selections. And then I think then it's going to come together for you. So let's hit this hard. What is evolutionary culture? It is literally the celebration of oneness. As I talked about yesterday morning, demonstrating that there is this dominant worldview of oneness and how it can be portrayed through politics, through religion, even through technology and architecture. If the dominant worldview of oneness is rising as fast as we think it is, it must also show itself in culture itself. It has to show itself in culture, and indeed, that is the case. And so evolutionary culture is literally that celebration of oneness, coming together in festivals, gatherings, tribes, organic community to celebrate our own connection to the earth and to celebrate our connection to each other and to the divine. It is literally, as I said, a celebration of oneness. If you have that in your head, you've got it. So, what do these celebrations look like? Well, if I give you a list of celebrations, major festivals that are evolutionary in its culture, who here would recognize any of these? Burning Man. Hands go up. Yes, a couple. There's a few. Good. Boom or Ozora. No? One hand maybe? Okay. The Maitreya Festival, Universal Religion, all of these are a handful, and I mean just a handful, of transformational festivals that take place around the world. I began giving this presentation last year, And I made the mistake of, in my first parts of my presentation, saying that there's about 120 to 150 festivals. I was wrong. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and possibly thousands worldwide. And we'll get into that a little bit more, demonstrating that this is truly a global phenomena. So what do these transformational festivals, what does evolutionary culture look like? Typically, these are 3 to 10-day events. They come together in organic community. They come together voluntarily. They interact with each other, and then they dissolve. It has a sense of family, a sense of connection. You are coming together to experience with each other. It's about radical tolerance, non-judgmentalism. In fact, that is one of the keys that comes out over and over again. One of the things you hear as you interview and talk to participants who've been there, it's a freeing environment. You feel as if you can be anything you want to be. You can be yourself, and nobody will judge you. Oftentimes, there are sacred spaces. In fact, it's considered a sacred container and considered the new spirituality for the millennial generation. Oftentimes, we'll have temples, shrines, little sacred spaces set up within the festival structure itself. Sometimes the temples are huge. In fact, Ireland just had a massive temple burn, and we'll be getting into temple burns in a few minutes, just a couple of weeks ago, based off of the Burning Man model. It's a place where you feel connected to nature. In fact, you feel very much a part of it, because oftentimes these festivals are held in mountain settings or deserts or on the ocean beaches. Occasionally, they're urban, but mostly they're out in the wild. You'll find things like yoga, rituals, all kinds of spiritual encounters, what they call ceremonies, where you all stand around and share your inner feelings, or prayerformances, where you pray collectively together. You pray to the energy, to the divine. Lots of trance music. It's basically EDM music, electronic dance music, though not all festivals are like that. Some of them have folk music. Some have country music. There's a real wide variety of music. However, the main thing is that the music, especially with trance or EDM, it drives the dance floor to create an experience together. And that's a very important part of it. It's considered a shamanistic experience. You'll have visionary art. There will be live painting, people demonstrating art techniques, incredible structures that are built, usually voluntarily. And it's really creative. And the evolutionary art that's being displayed all speaks to this idea that we are one, and we're now portraying it through what we can create together. There's workshops, there's lectures. You can go sit in on different speeches and presentations. So there's a learning side to it, and it's participatory. You're not just sitting around in your chairs. You are engaging with it as well, all the way through. In fact, you're engaging here with literally a new way of thinking, a new reality, and there's an emphasis on oneness and unity. The idea, the bottom line is we will transform you, and in so doing, we transform society. We transform culture. Jeet K. Lung, who is an advocate for transformational festivals, comes from the lower mainland of BC, says this: it's not just the idea of the world we want to live in, it's the actual experience. Now, I know at this point some of you are going, I don't get it yet, and that's fine. You will in a few minutes. Evolutionary culture, there's a range in terms of what is considered evolutionary culture. From straight-out pagan gatherings like Starwood and Pagan Spirit Gathering, which takes place in the Midwest, to music and art festivals like Bear Creek, Bonnaroo, or for your province, up north by Big River, Ness Creek Festival, which has already a serious transformational element, all the way to yoga and Hindu festivals like Holi, mythical gatherings, Gaia festivals, fairy festivals, which are becoming huge. And in our latest issue of Forcing Change magazine, I have a guest writer who writes about fairy faith. There's a whole mythical side. It is the idea of a reimagining or a re-emergence of the old ways of thinking. All the way over to mega concerts, mega Huge concerts that now have themes of oneness embedded in the concert itself, like Tomorrowland, and we'll be talking about that soon. And then in the very middle is what's considered hardcore transformational festivals, like Evolve Fest. And just last weekend was a big one in Southern California called Lucidity. So, what do these look like? What does transformational festivals look like? How big are they? Well, here's a handful of them. Lightning in a Bottle. About 15,000 people go to Lightning in a Bottle. Ozora, 35,000. Burning Man last year was over 70,000. Bonnaroo in central Tennessee, 90,000. Glastonbury, and here the image at the bottom, the aerial shot, that's Glastonbury. Big enough it has an 8.5-mile perimeter. Okay, this is not simply small time anymore. Or Tomorrowland last year, over the space of 2 weekends, because they couldn't contain it in one weekend anymore, 360,000. We'll be talking about Tomorrowland in a few minutes. And there's some pictures of festival settings, and just so you have an idea of it. G.K. Long said this at the Vancouver TEDx talk in 2010, and it's true. No less profound is this emergence of a new type of spiritual culture in these festivals, a spiritual culture completely uninterested in charismatic leaders, dogmas, or doctrine, where ritual does not require that we surrender our autonomy as critical thinking individuals, but instead arises as the shared acknowledgement and honoring of our sacred experience together. So, how is this described? These are quotes from people who attend these types of events and what they've experienced and how it has changed their life. Simply the most extraordinary spiritual and political and cultural thing that has ever happened to me. And, of course, it completely affected the rest of my life. The experience of Burning Man was just so overwhelming and so powerful that it literally sent my life on a 90-degree turn from the direction it was headed, and I never looked back. These festivals are really doorways to open a whole life-altering change. Having the trance experience changes your life forever. I don't think there's any way you can see the world the same after you've been through that experience. It's my religion. There's no doubt about it. And as you interact with this culture, you realize that that indeed is the case. This is a religious, spiritual experience. On my way to Southern California in February to give this talk at the Truth Exchange Conference, I ended up getting laid over in Minneapolis. And I sat there for a long time because of storms on the East Coast. And during my time there, I ended up sitting beside a young lady for just a few minutes in one of the waiting areas. And she had with her a hula hoop, and just the way she was dressed, I went, you're into something. So she sat down beside me and said, "Excuse me, are you a flow artist?" How many in this room even knows what a flow artist is? Nobody, okay. "Are you a flow artist?" She goes, "Yes." "Oh, wow, which transformational festivals do you go to?" She started listing them off to me. Joshua Tree, a bunch on the East Coast. And so I asked her, what's common between all of these? Because you've been to a bunch of them. And she says, oh, it's spiritual. It's all spiritual. Our conversation was only that long, but I learned everything I needed to learn. A flow artist, by the way, is somebody who uses hula hoops or fire wands, various devices to spin and try to mimic the flow of the energy of the universe. And then it's done in a very artistic, very wonderful way, beautiful way. And it is an amazing spectacle. But the whole meaning and the purpose behind it is to mirror or mimic the rhythm, the cosmic rhythm of the universe. Your culture is changing, folks. I haven't sat beside too many people from, let's say the Sikh religion or from, you could list a few other different ones. But here in Minneapolis, I have somebody who sits down right beside me, just a younger person, dresses a little bit different with a hula hoop. Just ask the question, "Are you a flow artist?" Bang, yes. I went, okay. This culture is far more embedded in our society than what we realize. It's all spiritual. And it's beyond just your individual experience. It's a social transformation. This is what one person described it as, a sacred space for today's generation. And so this is the type of terminology you find battered around when you're talking about evolutionary culture. It's an experiment in our future. It's about modeling a new society or becoming one, experiencing community, a new paradigm for cultural engineering. One thing that I found fascinating was in one of the interviews with a board member for Burning Man, it was acknowledged right off the bat that this is not just simply huge, but that there's such a demand that the demand is outpacing the supply. And we have 70,000 people showing up in one spot. I mean, that's demand. Every year it's growing. There is big demand. Burning Man founder Larry Harvey says this, and he said this, I believe, 2 years ago in one of his interviews. Its reputation, Burning Man, reaches everywhere. It's enormously persuasive. We want to bend the arc of the 21st century. It's a world movement. And then the picture you see in the background, that's the effigy burn, because they burn a human figure every year at the end of their Burning Man celebration. So I wrote about this in 2013. There were others who have written about Burning Man and just that. But as far as I know, I was the first one to connect the dots that this is not just simply one event, but rather literally a global phenomena, that these are festivals that are taking place all around the world and they all have a commonality to them. And so I wrote about this. I wasn't sure if this would resonate with my readers with forcing change, but I was surprised how quickly I was receiving emails coming back to me from people saying, hey, I'm from Australia. I was part of that. I'm from Montana. My granddaughter's involved with this. Over and over again. And then in 2014, traveling across, 2013, traveling across southern Saskatchewan, I stopped at Swift Current, and there was a little poster, I believe it was at the Smitty's, for a small 1 or 2 day event that was being tried out in Swift Current at the old mall downtown. So it's here. And in fact, you're going to find out it's really here. And so this resonated. I realized that there is a movement here that people, especially the millennial generation, are connecting with. And in studying this, I understand the appeal. I totally get it. It looks exciting because it is exciting. And you're going to see the videos. It is phenomenal. There is an appeal to it. So how did we get to this point where now we can literally celebrate oneness? I'm going to take you through a bit of history. We're going to look at the 70s, the 60s and 70s. We're going to look at the time period where we went from the fringe to the mainstream, the year 2000 and up to now. And then we're going to take a look at some of the festivals and our response. So in the 1960s and 70s, we saw the beginning of this. We saw the beginning of this primarily first through Woodstock, which was considered an Aquarian explosion. Now, what's crazy is the festivals I'll be talking about today make Woodstock look small. I mean, Woodstock was a one-time event. Many of these that we're talking about have been in existence for years and years and years and just have been growing and now are starting to push into the culture in major ways. The 60s and 70s was about mind expansion, psychedelics. It was about free love. The gurus of the East came west. And the 60s began to emerge and give us the idea of postmodernism. We had the ideas of world unity that came into the picture, world peace. There was a rejection and an anger towards Christianity and biblical norms, free love, unfettered sexuality. We were beginning to look to the earth and making that a sacred object. Earth Day begins. It becomes the greening of spirituality. And this is where postmodernism begins to really enter the picture. What's interesting is I assert postmodernism is on its way out. I know that's going to sound like a shocker for many of you, but really, it's already on its way out. And these transformational festivals demonstrate that amply. Postmodernism ultimately is all about questioning and not having answers. Well, these transformational festivals say, oh, no, we're finding answers. And the answers go back to the idea of the ancient myth, the idea that we can become one. There's a very spiritual, very definite purpose in this change in culture. The 60s and 70s also gave us the idea of organic community living, intentional community, where it's safe, it's non-judgmental, it's open, it's a model for inclusivity. And in a very real way, transformational festivals try to mimic that, except in a short period. The 80s and 90s saw, again, another change that began to happen in our culture. Things like yoga and transcendental meditation started entering into the mainstream. What was fringe becomes mainstream. The health industry begins to explore Eastern ways. You find the worldview embedded in our education system. The corporate world begins to embrace New Age philosophies and techniques in team building and corporate strategies. New Age publishing begins to really take off with different book fairs and vendors and all kinds of things. What started off as a cottage industry in the 80s, by the mid-90s, was a full-blown new marketplace. And I saw that happen. As a researcher who began down this road in the early 1990s, I would go to a bookstore and you'd only find a small selection of books on the New Age. It was hard sometimes to get the material. By the end of the 90s, you would walk into some of the same bookstores and you would not just have one shelf, you'd have shelf, row. Told me how much already the culture was accepting the change in a space of only 10 years. Pagan festivals are birthed in the early 1980s. Some of the biggest ones like Starwood and Pagan Spirit Gathering. The New Age ends up embedding itself in our culture. Green spirituality blooms and blossoms, and technology and spirituality it's starting to become explored as a common denominator. And of course, Hollywood and the entertainment industry jumps into this fray, and they become the new preachers for this way of thinking. At the same time, at the end of the 1980s, you have what's called the rave culture, built around electronic dance music and the dance floor itself. It integrates lasers, light shows. It's a really phenomenal experience. It's an underground movement because it has a reputation for drugs, and it did have a very wicked, you could call it, drug culture that was a part of it. And so there was a lot of police presence. There was crackdowns on raves. It really was an underground movement. But something very interesting happened with the rave culture. It was recognized that there was a spiritual sense, a spiritual feeling, and that's what it is. It's a feeling that comes with it. And this is what one website says regarding the early rave and even today, the rave culture. The party becomes a spiritual ritual in which the music's machine-driven beats and transcendental sound synchronize our bodies and souls to the rhythm of the universe, just like being a flow artist. We feel connected not just to each other, but also to the forces of nature that revolve around us and pulsate within us. And so this gives you already a sense of the feeling, and that's what it does. It gives you a feeling that takes place. What's interesting is, even in the EDM, electronic dance music community, and the rave community, they realize that it's not just about you bopping your head to the music in your bedroom by yourself. That doesn't do anything for you. Enjoy it, whatever. Yes, sure, that's what they say. No big deal. But where it comes together in a spiritual sense is on the dance floor where we're doing it collectively, and all of a sudden we all are tuned in at the same time, and we're all doing the same thing together. It becomes literally an active type of a mantra, which is why certain EDM performers say this is basically techno-shamanism. And by the way, all kinds of other music forms do all kinds of different things as well. The 2000s, our new millennium, we see some big changes begin to take shape in culture. Eastern beliefs and practices become very commonplace. We end up chasing the spiritual and the supernatural, and we have seen that in spades. Spirituality and technology becomes closer together, especially in terms of things like virtual worlds. And I'll show you some pictures about that in a few minutes. We have earth loyalties that become very defined. Established music festivals like Glastonbury, which what started off in the early 1970s as just a rock concert, now becomes transformational in its scope and in the way it thinks. Yoga, sacred spaces, things like this become embedded in what was simply concerts. Burning Man goes from a hedonistic party that started off on the beaches of San Francisco, moved into the deserts of northern Nevada, where basically for 10 years they ran around naked, shot up stuff, and got drunk. It becomes something different. It changes. It becomes artistic. It all of a sudden becomes connected to the idea of oneness. And then big new music festivals like Tomorrowland begin with oneness. And that begins to start to drive a new myth, a new culture. Pagan subcultures grow. We see now the emergence of goddess and Beltane festivals, even in the United States and Canada. And we have the emergence of large pagan gatherings. Rave culture meets pagan New Age elements. They come together and recognize they're sharing a commonality, a spiritual feeling. And now you have the emergence of full-on transformational festivals. And what we see with this is the fact that postmodernism is starting to fade, which is just about questions, and no answers, to something else. The age of one, the age of re-enchantment. And I'm working on a book project right now that goes into that in some detail. And by the way, that's a terminology being used within the transformational festival movement. We are entering an age of re-enchantment, back to the old ways. It is ancient, it is future. In fact, that's exactly what Jeet Lee Kung says. This is also a future culture. This is the counterculture of the internet, of the Web 2.0 generation. And rather than being Luddite back to the landers, we are early adopters of technology. Electronic music is a type of digital art. There have always been lots of techies, web developers, digital media artists in this culture. So at the same time, we see this tribal, ancient, mythic meme moving through. We also have this sci-fi, galactic, techno meme happening at the same time. So, an ancient future culture. We're going back to re-emergence, or we are emerging from the old ways. Now, how has the Christian community responded to these changes in our culture? We have slid into postmodernism ourselves. We're behind a little bit. Absolutes dissolve. We haven't quite slid down quite as far as transformational festivals, though there are at least 2 that I know of that are Christian-oriented, that cater to the emergent church movement. But the church community, we seek after the experiential. We now are starting to seek after the mythical. We are seeing that in the emergent church movement, which is just simply reimagination, is just simply re-enchantment. We are finding Eastern spiritual practices in the church itself, yoga, labyrinths, the list goes on. And we're far more interested in social justice issues than we are in anything else, it seems. We will change the world for the better. We end up putting the focus back on ourselves. What's fascinating is how many, I think, former churchgoers go to some of these events. And I've seen some of the interviews and kind of connected a little bit with the movement. And there's a number of former church leaders, youth leaders especially, who end up going to events like Burning Man. And they recognize it's their new sacred space. It's their new experience. So I'm going to take you to a few of these festivals. And we're going to show some videos because that's the only way that you're going to properly understand what this looks like. So I'm going to take you first to Burning Man. Burning Man started in 1986. It happens in northern Nevada. It's large, 70,000 people. But there is a Burning Man culture literally around the world. We have it in Canada. In fact, Saskatoon has a Burning Man culture. Saskatchewan has a Burning Man community. Alberta does. Manitoba doesn't yet for some strange reason. I don't know why. But there is a Burning Man culture right here in your own province. And in fact, at the Ness Creek Festival happening this summer, the Saskatchewan Burners, that's what they call themselves, are going to be there setting up a special theme camp. And they wanted to do an effigy burn, but apparently the logistics of the burn isn't coming together. So it's a global movement. Burning Man has spurned a whole cultural change. And it's considered the petri dish of postmodernism. I would suggest it goes beyond that. Who goes to Burning Man? By the way, these are images from Burning Man. That's some of the artwork. The people are the small parts of the picture. It's all bigger than life. Who goes? Google goes. Apple goes. Sony goes. Corporate CEOs go. It's a huge, huge event. It's not just young people. People of every demographic situation go to Burning Man. You old people, young people. It is a place where the old hippies go and the new hippie wannabes participate as well. And it's exciting. There's things that happen at Burning Man. It's not always a pleasant situation. There have been murders, there have been suicides, there have been some pretty ugly things that happen. In fact, there's a lot of ugliness that happens at Burning Man. But there's also a lot of creativity and a lot of excitement. So here's just a few images from Burning Man. Who here drives semis? All right, try that trick. Yeah. That's just some of the artwork that is displayed at Burning Man, including the church trap. I think that was from 2013. My wife and I have watched the Burning Man event on the live stream because they stream it every year. We've watched it now, I believe, for 5 or 6 years. I've been wanting to go for a long time. I have friends who do go, and they go there literally to witness at the gates. And it's quite the spectacle. Burning Man has 10 commandments, and these are the 10 commandments for Burning Man. Radical inclusion, gifting, decommodification. In other words, you can't set up a Tim Hortons there. Radical self-expression, you be yourself. Communal effort, it's about the group. Civic responsibility, you're going to clean up, you're going to do your best to be a good person. Leave no trace. When it's all done, the desert has to remain a desert, which is a pretty phenomenal feat when you put 70,000 people in one spot over the course of about a week and a half. Participation. You're not just there as an observer. You are involved. That's the idea. You're part of this. And immediacy. If you see something happening, engage in it. And so these are just some of the images. A few more images. And at the end of the week, you burn the man. And that's the man that was from this year's burn, or pardon me, 2014's burn. When the arms were raised up, it was over 120 feet high. And so at the end of the week, the 70,000 people gather around the man. You have fire priests, you have fire drummers. If you're a first-timer to Burning Man, you're considered a burn virgin. And you party, you celebrate. I mean, it's wild. Incredible fireworks, amazing. Even watching the live stream, you're going, oh my word, that's wild. And so it's a party atmosphere. They also have a temple, a very large temple. And over the course of those 10 days or roughly a week or so, you participate by going to the temple, writing notes, leaving little pictures, expressing yourself, pouring yourself out in this temple. And then on Sunday, they burn the temple. And the atmosphere, even on the live feed, you can tell is very different. What is a crazy party when they burn the man becomes a somber, sacred moment around the fire that happens at the temple as they raise it to the ground. And then, just to give you a sense of the size, there is an aerial view of the city. It's called Black Rock City. Yes, it is a city. It even has its own temporary postal code for the time that it's set up every year from August into early part of September. And these are just some more images of the burns, including the temple burn. And for myself, though I have not been there, I go to the Second Life burn. They have what's called Burn 2 in a virtual world. And so every year I go in and I interact with burners who can't go to the actual burn. We all gather literally virtually. We watch in 3 dimensions as the burn is fed in, live streamed into us in our virtual space, and I interact with other participants one-on-one, just like right here, right now. Who here knows anything about virtual worlds, Second Life, in-worlds, and other virtual spaces? 1, 2 hands, maybe 3, a handful. Virtual worlds are this. It is a 3-dimensional environment. It goes beyond simply a game. It is where you go in as an avatar of yourself. That's me. Or not me, but a mirror of myself. And you go in a 3-dimensional space and you literally move around with each other. You interact in a 3D environment. It's all in real time. I can go up to somebody. If Kevin's in virtual space, like Second Life, I can go right up to him and we'll talk just as we can talk right now. But it's all being done through avatars, through just little mirror images of yourself. And so the burn community gathers at a specific site in Second Life. And by the way, Second Life goes to the Burning Man also. And I interact with the culture there. It's very, very interesting what kind of conversations you have around Second Life as you interact with the transformational festival crowd. So here's some videos. This is just a Burning Man. Listen to what they're saying. That is so key.
It's not about sex and drugs.
Whatever you want to call it, city or festival or community or event.
It's not about Satan.
Quite a party going on out west.
Going on over a decade.
And it is about Satan.
We thought you might like to see up close, what some people have called a proto-apocalyptic, hippie, neo-pagan freak fest.
Something big, something powerful.
It seems to combine art and music.
It's not like Lollapalooza.
Almost like a tech industrial fetishism that goes on out there.
I think many people really think it's just one huge freak show. So if you don't really know somebody who's been here, I think it's pretty hard to really get the picture.
This is one of those events that the outside world needs to see at some point.
There is a huge man.
This guy couldn't explain it. I couldn't explain it.
That was glowing blue made out of sticks.
As much as it's not a religion, people develop a religious kind of fervor around it.
It's like we go there for some reason, and I don't know, I'm not sure what we worship.
I really do think it's the journey, and it's not so much that final artwork, but getting there.
We do it against all odds in the harshest environment, against the wishes of the government often.
They could basically fine us. I could go to jail. There could be very serious repercussions.
The real event is the one that happens up here.
I want to be part of something that helps change the world.
Here's to Larry Harvey for having a lame idea 17 years ago.
To tell you the truth, I don't know if I'm all that eager to get there. I mean, what happens when you...
What happens when you get there? Yeah. Did you catch it's all up here? This is where the real event happens. And that's exactly right. It's about transformation. So that's just a little taste of Burning Man. I'm going to take you to Boom, the Boom Festival in Portugal. Boom started in 1997. It has approximately 25,000 who attend from over 90 countries. There's workshops, there's sacred spaces. It's noted for its tribal feel. It has yoga stations, global unity. This is really a part of the flavoring of Boom. Listen again to what's being said.
There is no word to explain the vibration, the feeling that's happening here. Suddenly, you have come into a whole new reality of a human family.
We're creating kind of a fantasy, mirage, a vision of what reality could be like or how we would wish that reality was more like.
I come from France.
From Hamburg, Germany.
South Africa. England.
Why do we came to Boom?
Dance.
You are not separate. Everybody around you is somehow the same being. The planet is not separate from ourselves either.
There you go. That was Boom. Last year was the event. 2016 will be the next Boom Festival. And again, it's one of those events that's only growing in size. Now, Lightning in the Bottle is noted for its color. It takes place in Southern California, and last year I gave this presentation in Colorado Springs. And after I was done, I had a woman come up to me. I had actually, to an audience of about 300 people, I had at least 6 different sets of parents come to me and say, that's my son, that's my daughter. I had one guy come up to me and say, that's my 40-year-old. which is me. I'm in my mid-40s, well, closer to 50s and 40s already. But it was crazy. I had one lady come to me and she says, my son goes to Lightning in the Bottle. This has become his new religion. He believes it's the best place. It's where the world is being remade. And she says something really great happened to him there. Something fantastic happened to him there. He has had all of his belongings in his backpack, his laptop, about $800 in cash, his clothes. And he had put his backpack up against a tree and he walked away because it's safe. This is utopia. And he was at the dance floor, and when he was done, he came back, and it was all gone. Everything, vamoosed, vanished, stole. And it crushed him, it devastated him, because this was supposed to be utopia. And so he had to make a collect call back home, and his mom was saying that was the best thing he ever had to do. Because it just shattered that illusion that this is truly mankind at its best. So, Lightning in a Bottle. Spun out of Burning Man, 15,000 people attend. It's noted for its temple of consciousness. It's noted also for, again, its color, its lighting, its visionary artwork. And again, listen to what they're saying.
If we could just take Lightning in a Bottle and make it bigger and turn it into a city, I would live in the rest of my life.
A spirit introduced himself to them, one who can do wondrous deeds to assist in their spiritual development.
What would you be doing if you could do anything in the world? Anything that you couldn't do if you're normal? I just want people to be happy, that's all.
And he traveled around the world and helped certain people. How could we become more light? How could we become more like the sun?
Other people on other planets, they're all a part of a family, and we're all family.
So if you want to find something, you have to put the intention, and your energetic self can have a direct communication with its origin, the sun.
This earth is our mother. If there were no water or earth or grass, we wouldn't be here.
Give something back to the sun, to the earth. We dance as best we can, dress up as best we can. The energy of the fire is in your heart. Every one of our hearts is directly connected. Every time your heart beats, my heart feels it. And so does everybody else's. Feel your heart, not your mind. Then you can begin to transmit a feeling.
I think love is an energy in a higher vibration. When we have love and we just contact with someone with love, they can feel it and they'll be happy. And if someone's sad and you come in their energy field and you're happy and you give good energies, they'll come be happy. Once one person's happy, another person's happy, and then another person's happy, and then everyone's loving. All of us together in harmony.
It's about your feeling. It's not about your mind. It's about loving. It's about community. It's very attractive to a postmodern world that's now shifting into something else. And this is one of those expressions of that shift. And then there's Tomorrowland, which is a concert. It's not a transformational festival, but it's considered part of evolutionary culture. Why? Because as a concert venue, it, from beginning to end, preaches oneness, and it has its own mythology it builds as it portrays oneness to you. It's huge. Absolutely huge. It began in Belgium and now takes place just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And this year it's expanding into Brazil. To give you a sense of the size, in 2013, 180,000 people attended Tomorrowland. Now, what's fascinating about Tomorrowland, even the stage itself, and the stages are monsters. I mean, they're huge, interacts with the audience. And in between the sets, the stage itself will talk to you and tell you about how you're all connected to one. You watch some of the interviews of the young people who go, and they realize, oh yeah, we're all one. It's all interdependence. We're all coming together in harmony and in love. So, 2013, 180,000 people attended. If all of a sudden you had a big name celebrity that came to Saskatoon, the biggest names you could think of, how fast would a concert sell out? If, let's say, Katy Perry came to Saskatoon, if Katy Perry came to Saskatoon, how fast would her tickets sell out? 5 minutes? Okay. 180,000 people went to Tomorrowland in 2013. How fast do you think the concert tickets sold out for 180,000 people? Guesses? Less than a minute. Yes, considerably less than a minute. Go down. Go down. Reportedly under 1 second. When it opened up, 2.2 million people jammed the lines. And it created such a logistical nightmare. They, by the way, have their own air fleet that flies people in, painted with Tomorrowland colors from Rio, from Toronto, from Tokyo, from literally around the world to come to Tomorrowland in Belgium. It created such a logistical nightmare that in 2014 they had to change the structure of it. They set it up for 2 events, for 2 weekends. 360,000 people now came, and they were able to handle ticket sales a little bit better. 360,000 tickets sold for well under an hour. It gives you a sense of the demand. Demand far outpaces supply in this new culture. It's noted for its global sense of oneness and unity. And what's interesting is you talk to people who have been there, either through, for myself, virtual worlds or in other venues. And what's interesting is they say that they've participated. It isn't just simply you're going to watch, you're participating. And it's considered to be more international in its scope than even the Olympics. It has a broader representation. What's interesting about the Olympics is this. You may go and sit in the Olympics. Now, who here has been to the Olympics? I haven't, but who here has? One hand. Ted, what did you do at the Olympics? Did you participate? What was your sport?
Nothing. It was the 67 in Montreal.
But you weren't participating. See, there's a difference. Ted went, but he didn't participate. You watched. I guarantee you, most folks who go to the Olympics just watch. Here, you participate. That's the feeling that comes out of this event and other transformational events. That's why it becomes far more personal, far deeper in its character change to the person. Here's just a few snapshots of Tomorrowland. Now, the picture on the top, those aren't flowers or weeds or vegetation in the picture. That's people. And the face and the backdrop behind it, that's just a part of the stage. It has its own mythology built around it, and you'll see a little bit of that in the clip. And so there's the bottom picture, has some of the mythology that's kind of built into it. It gives you this sense, this feeling that you're now connecting to an ancient way of thinking, that you're now experiencing it in a new techno way. So here we have just a taste of Tomorrowland. This is just music and images of the event itself so that you get a sense of the size, the scope, the energy, and there is appeal with young people, and I can understand all across the entire spectrum of human interest because there is just so much happening. It is so energetic. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go.
Towards the end of July, a brilliant scientist discovered the stars were in perfect alignment to make the next step in the evolution of consciousness.
This is their trailer, by the way. This is their myth.
He guided us to a mystical land between the shadows of wonder, to be part of an astonishing gathering in the history of our planet. Travelers from all corners of the world followed the astronomer in his footsteps, where the spirit of the mountain was revealed, and all our dreams became reality.
You can't compete with that. That's phenomenal in terms of what humans can do. And it's all geared around the concept of transformation and change. And Tomorrowland is noted again for oneness. Tomorrow World is the U.S. equivalency of that. And again, it takes place just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. What is this all about? Well, there was a documentary series that happened a couple of years ago entitled Electronic Awakening. And this is how they describe their own culture. This is how they describe what this is about. Because it's not just simply about bopping your head to the beat in your own bedroom somewhere. It's about collectively engaging in this energy of change. So they described it this way: a redefinition of the tribal ritual for the 21st century. Neo-techno tribal shamanism. It's just oneness and unity. That's your new culture. That's evolutionary culture. So, we have them in Canada too. Don't kid yourself. This is global. In fact, Canada has a lot of them. Here's just a handful of them. Shambhala takes place just outside of Nelson, BC. Nelson's what? Only 10,000 people big? Shambhala has over 10,000 people that just come to that event alone. It changes Nelson for that period of time. Burn in the Woods, Otherworld, Luminosity, Inshallah, just outside of Fort Macleod, Alberta. Inshallah is noted again for its sense of connecting to the earth and to each other. Wanderlust, which is a global yoga transformational event, festival event. We have Wanderlust events that take place in Canada, in Quebec and in BC, primarily at Whistler. Base Coast, Connect, which is one of yours in Saskatchewan. It's been around for 20 years. Started off just simply as an EDM festival, an electronic music festival. Now is beginning to take on evolutionary, transformational elements to it, a lot of them. By the way, Connect Festival happens just between Briarcrest and Mortlach. I'm probably mispronouncing it. Yes, Mortlach, thank you. Just south of the number 1 highway. And Dimensional Rift, this happens in my province, Manitoba. I'm looking to try to go to it this year. Dimensional Rift is a smaller one. This year's theme for Dimensional Rift is Together We Are One. I'm very interested to go and just talk and see where people come from, even what their background is. One project I've been really wanting to do for a while, and I've been doing it kind of online, is just doing informal conversations, and down the road I'd like to do a full-blown survey. What's your background? Because I have a strange feeling that there's a lot of people, especially on the U.S. side, who come from a church background. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. And Astral Harvest. Here's just a few. These are just some of the events that take place in Canada. So I started doing a mapping project last year. When I first started speaking on this, as I said earlier, I said there's 120 to 150 festivals worldwide. I was so wrong. There is so much more going on. And so this map here represents about 200 of them in North America alone. And I'm not done the project. I have another 50 to 80 to vet, and probably another 50 to 80 that I know of that I need to really work through and determine if they go on the map or not. I don't have most of the ones for BC. BC has a lot of them. And I don't have all of them for Alberta either. So here's a few vital points to keep in mind. What does this represent to you? This represents a paradigm change in Western society. Oneness is the dominant worldview, and it is now being celebrated. In the year 2000, a poll came out asking about do you feel that you are connected to one? It was a U.S.-based poll. 85% of Americans said yes to that question. They might not have understood why they said yes, but they said yes. This movement represents an intentional rejection of biblical standards, exclusive truth claims, traditional morality, judgmental attitudes. And you know something? Don't think they're going to come to your church because they've rejected that out hand. And you can't compete with this. You're not supposed to compete with this. You're offering something very different. As ambassadors for Christ, with truth and light, your job is to be salt and light in this kind of a community. It's now in your neighborhood. It's a rejection of organized religions with a replacement to spirituality and the group experience. And it's also a cultural yearning for meaning. Postmodernism has left us empty. We are now looking for something to fill the void. This is where it's going. These are some other key points to keep in mind. It's a reflection already of what's happened in our society. That's the important part. This is simply a mere reflection of what's already happening at the heart level with your neighbors and your family and your own community. It's a celebration of one. It has mass appeal. It's not a fad. This isn't going away. And it's a reemergence of what we would consider the ancient pagan ideal. It's re-enchantment. So how do we respond? We're running out of time. I would suggest we have to respond in one of two ways. One way that we will respond, I'm very sure of it, is we will ignore it. We're very good at that. We'll ignore it. The other way is to somehow get involved in proclaiming the truth. I would suggest there's two passages that we need to consider as we look at how to respond. And in fact, I'm still working through what a response looks like. And that is John chapter 4 and Acts 17. John chapter 4, Jesus meets the woman at the well, a phenomenal example of how to give truth to a culture that's different than your own. And then Paul at Mars Hill presents again a phenomenal demonstration of how to interact, giving the gospel message to a culture that is philosophically and spiritually hostile to yours. Study those two examples, please. That is so important. And then get involved. I guarantee most of you will never go to Burning Man. Probably none of you here will go to Burning Man. There are some who will go to transformational festivals. I have one friend, as I said, who goes. He hoists an Israeli flag. He actually got kicked out of Burning Man about 10 years ago. How do you get kicked out of Burning Man? Anything goes. Well, when they instituted the 10 rules in 97, he went up to the organizers and he said, "How dare you become a Christian organization?" And they're like, "What are you talking about?" And my friend Bob is like, "You're becoming a Christian organization. You're putting standards in place that reflects something higher than yourself." And they're like, "Bob, you're out of here." So he's outside Burning Man. Him and his son and a small team put up a tent, hoist an Israeli flag because that's a lightning rod. And they have everybody under the sun come to them. There's no one there because of their flag. And then as you have 70,000 people coming in and out, they're there handing out bottles of water, changing flat tires. And people are going, "Well, why are you changing my tire, dude?" And Bob's like, "Because I'm a Christian. Here's a bottle of water." And when you do that, all of a sudden it's opened up to all kinds of interesting conversations because that's the last thing they're expecting. What my friend Bob is very afraid of is the Christian community shows up to Burning Man with bullhorns and placards, because that will just reinforce what they already believe about us. I realize most of you can't do that. But what you can do is this. You can begin to equip your own church, your own youth ministries, your own Christian community to recognize this worldview shift, to recognize this change, and begin to equip your people, not to be aware or to be concerned about what a transformational festival might look like in your backyard, but more important, what the worldview is that underlies it, because it's already in your community. Involve yourself in the lives of others and demonstrate salt and light. That's what we have to do, and be willing to engage with those around us. Our world is changing. There's no question about it, but love and truth does not change. That's your role, to present love and truth to a culture that's going to become increasingly more hostile to you as Christians. Thank you for taking the time this morning to come and listen to this. I realize it's heavy. If you want to know more about transformational festivals, evolutionary culture, we have a CD that has reports, audios, and other information in here that you can find that will be very helpful to better understand this. I'm going to tell you the way I tell everybody, when you get these things, it's mine. So as a writer, I'm supposed to have copyright the whole bit. As the writer, I'm going to tell you blunt out. Copy it. Distribute it. Send it out. That's what you need to do. Likewise with my DVD, which will help to understand a little bit more about postmodernism and some of the transformation that's taking place. And also, for goodness sakes, please check out Snowmanology. It is, I keep pushing this because it's such a hoot. It's a good little book. You really need to check it out. Kevin, I'll turn it back to you.